Hi there, this video is going to take a look at monocrop agriculture as part of a series of videos studying the environmental impacts of agri-food, and this one looking at issues more specific to monocrop agriculture. And what do we mean by this? Monocrop agriculture means we're growing one. The prefix mono means one crop at a time, which has become the dominant model of agriculture, growing all corn or all soy, for instance, and it has some associated risks and problems. The vulnerabilities are to pests. An example of that's the boll weevil, which destroyed the cotton crop in the south long ago, wreaking havoc on the southern economy. Nutrients, also because of monocrop harvests being total. The entire plant is removed from the soil oftentimes. There's nothing left in terms of organic matter to replenish the nutrients in the soil, and that leaves the soil depleted. And if you don't uh, replace that with synthetic nutrients, then you won't be able to grow any more crops. Once nutrients are gone, as we saw previously looking at clearing forest land for pasture land, for instance, soil erosion follows, especially in high rain areas, because if you remove the root systems of plants in an area with a lot of rain, it tends to wash the soil away. So the organic layer of soil can be removed with heavy rainfall, creating mudslides and those kinds of things. Uh, and it also increases dependence, as we are noting here, on synthetic fertilizer, which of course also has an economic implication by raising the cost of production. And the other part of this, controlling pests, right? We want to have a good harvest. We can't have pests destroying the crops. And so there's an increasing reliance on pesticides of different types, which are all toxic in some form. And laying down a layer of toxic in the environment is going to create problems for the drinking water quality, for the wildlife, and other types of issues related to that. So thinking about the cost of agriculture, monocropping, as we just noted, creates dependence on both fertilizers and pesticides, and also increases the cost of production. And part of this cost is not actually considered because of the externalities. We don't take into account the economic damage that's caused by destroying the environment with toxic pesticides. It's harder to quantify that, but there are some estimates out there. Leach and Mumford and Pimentel have tried to nail down some estimates of what those costs would be, but without considering externalities, a $1 investment in pesticide returns of $4 in crops. So if the costs are internalized, we're going to lose that profit margin of 75%, might be closer to breaking even. These are some of the estimates that have been provided by, as previously mentioned, Leach and Mumford and Pimentel, looking at the UK, the USA, and Germany. The economic cost of pesticide and drinking water is the biggest one. We could see estimates ranging from 280 billion all the way up to 1.1 trillion in the US. It's a bigger country than the other, Germany or the UK. Also pollution incidents, fish deaths, because there's a whole industry around fisheries, and so killing fish with polluted water is an opportunity cost for the fisheries. There's also biodiversity and wildlife losses, which also carries economic value for tourism and other types of related economic industries. And so you could just see the costs rather staggering on this page, right? In terms of bird and fishery losses, crop losses, loss of honeybees. That's gaining public traction as a major issue, because without pollinators you can't have food, you can't grow crops. And so the totals, you can see $9.6 trillion in the U.S. Pretty staggering economic loss. Now going back to the issue of fertilizer, which is not as toxic, we do have to be concerned about the supply of phosphorus, because there's not that much phosphorus on Earth, and it's the foundation of most synthetic fertilizers, prior to that discovery, uh, attempts to replenish nutrients relied on practices like guano harvesting, which is the byproduct of animal or bat waste, which contains nutrients that can be applied to soils. Uh, but the guano trade of the 19th century quickly ran out of a supply because birds and bats just simply don't produce enough to meet the demand. So phosphorus initially provided a windfall against that, but now we're up against depleting resources. Morocco, China, the U.S., and South Africa have the largest deposits, but those are rapidly depleting. Sulfuric acid is produced mainly in developing countries as a byproduct, so that is another thing that is putting pressure on the supply. And as production demands increase, access to fertilizer will be critical. And they're expecting demand to go up 50 to 100% by 2050. So just as the supply is depleting, demand, of course, is going to be skyrocketing. So those are concerning trends. In terms of soil erosion, about a third of the world's cropland is lost to depletion because of, monocrop agriculture, intense rain, or sometimes extremely arid conditions can also, desertification can follow. Uh, about a quarter of the Earth's land area is affected by desertification, which threatens about 1 billion people directly. Of course, it threatens everybody uh, once we think about the globalization of the food system. But as we said, when vegetation is removed, whether it be through grazing, animals eating plants, or over plowing, removing the entire plant when the harvest is taken in from crop agriculture, the wind blows dust particles everywhere, and that can create dust storms. That historically in the U.S., the Dust Bowls of the 1930s led to some changes in agricultural practices, but we can still see similar occurrences in Asia, in China, Western Mongolia, and the Sahel, for instance. Uh, India is also losing about a quarter of its land to desert due to desertification. Um, 16 million tons of soil are being lost in Africa by 2020, and about three-quarters of wheatland in Mongolia has been abandoned, just gone to desert. And in Kazakhstan, on the steppe, they've gone from 25 to 11 million tons of grain production, although it's bounced back to 17 million, but still much lower than the peak. So again, once we have rising demand for food, we also see depleting resources. Metabolic rift theory was actually introduced by Marx in the 19th century, and as part of his third volume of Capital, he blamed the capitalist mode of agriculture for some of the problems that we're seeing. He says it creates a rift between the natural and the social order uh, that once existed in harmony before people got involved with farming in different capacities. And over farming has depleted soils, as we've seen. Of course, we saw and Marx lived during a time when guano was being traded internationally, and he also witnessed even more horrific practices such as digging up, exhuming dead bodies to process human bones, which also have phosphorus in them. Human bones were being ground up into a dust that was then being applied to fields as a form of agriculture, which should indicate the level of desperation that European farmers were looking at in the 19th century, and hopefully we'll never see again. But as we see depleting phosphorus deposits on Earth, we have to wonder what's going to come to replace it. The other part of metabolic rift theory has to do with urban populations who are, of course, creating large amounts of human excrement in such quantities that it's actually toxic. And instead of replenishing the nutrients of the soil, is actually overwhelming it and creating a problem. And so it's another example of where the natural and the social order has been disrupted, according to Marx. So maybe thinking of ways to use gray water, which is a sewage byproduct, to recapture nutrients is another potentiality going down the road. Thank you.